Hello, everybody. I've got a few things to go over today. The topic this week is software, and that's the thing I usually do the advanced courses on. So, in this class, during the software week, I'm always worried about going down too deep of a rabbit hole. But got a couple things to look at related to that. A very popular site, something you will encounter tomorrow, where you're heading in IT, even though it is sort of a software-oriented thing. Y'all have probably heard of it before. We'll see that. And I'm really glad to see that everybody's here today because I like to occasionally throw in-class assignments. Like the one I'm going to say, submit the file from class today. So we're going to do one of those today, so everybody's here, and it should be an easy follow-along thing. Not any trouble whatsoever. So we'll look at that, and it'll probably be shorter than the other day because we did run longer than normal on whatever day that was, Tuesday. Yeah. So I've got a couple things to look at, but probably for a short day, which I like to throw those in, especially on week 4, where most people have more than one class. We don't have a midterm in this class, but there's a pretty good chance you have a midterm in your other class, right? Or classes. So, or there's no shortage of things to do. Oh, yes, that is on my list. Thank you. Campuses, college is closed on the 4th. So it's open Monday. They didn't want to do the 4-day weekend, though. I believe a whole lot of people took Monday off. A lot of people that work on every day went ahead and took Monday off to get the 4-day weekend, but school's open on Monday, but for us on Tuesday, we will not have class. And then we'll be back Thursday to look at networks next week. Thank you for the reminder. I put that on the list and then skipped right over it when I started reading things off the list. It's like this other stuff's more IT related. I'll mention that later. So yes, no class next Tuesday. And I guess I'll go ahead and look at this site. So something you're going to see pretty regularly. Has anybody heard of this on GitHub? I see head nodding in here. So GitHub is a very popular code repository. Zoom buttons are in my way. I'm waiting for them to go away. There we go. So open the browser, we can go to github.com. So code repository is a place for managing our, I don't know, but it's more than just storage. It's connected to Git. So that's the thing I was going to talk about in a moment. The Linux operating system, when they were creating that, they weren't happy with any of the version control systems. Version control is how we keep track of different aspects. Y'all have probably done that with like an essay, right? Final paper underscore final. Final paper underscore final, really in final this time, and all those different versions. That gets to be a mess when we have to do different things. So having software that can manage all those different versions, so we don't have to keep like tacking on little bits to the name to keep track of which one's which. We just ultimately it's like we have alternate versions of the folder that we're looking at, so we just switch back and forth between what shows in that folder to manage the versions. So there's one called Git, which is not an acronym. It's British English for an unpleasant gentleman. Americans kept a B or word that starts with B, women, but we dropped the men one, so it's the male version of that. Linus Torvalds, who, if you haven't heard his name, that's a name you'll hear somewhere along the way. He made the Linux operating system and a whole bunch of other things. So he always names stuff after himself, and he knows he can be difficult to work with at times. So his version control system, he went with the name Git on. And then, so the code repositories have extra things. It's a place, start with a place to store code, but it can do more than that. Microsoft recently purchased this one. It had grown in popularity, and Microsoft purchased it and started promoting it, and, adding extra little features. So this actually has IDEs built in. Oh, that's not the one. Well, there's one from a previous class. If I go to some random file here, something from the Python course, we can see all the code, work with it, download the stuff. There's an IDE right in here. Microsoft just added this a couple weeks ago, very recently. But we can make and manage and track and organize and all that stuff with our software right here on this one site now. Having a real editor in here is fairly new. It's kind of a nice feature. It's all online. We store our code and then have forums for bug reporting and fixing and things like that. Actions, I was showing this in the class the other night. We actually create workflows so that the process of publishing the code and releasing it when we're finished is fully automated. Like one from class evening class on Tuesday, we did I think this might have been my practice one from getting ready. But we set it up so that there's a release that comes out every time we make a change to the repository. That's a new system. It's called CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. And then instead of releasing those updates periodically, like version 3.5.2 version, then release the major changes that aren't quite enough to call a new version yet. Then the third number is a patch, just a little fixes along the way. Instead of doing those and relying on the end user to stay up to date and install those, like the latest version of the software, we handle that automatically. So this is set up so that every time there's a change to the code, a new version is automatically released. And then the end user doesn't actually get the software installed on their computer. You'll notice here, there's just this big URL. So the end user, what we install on their computer is just something that asks for this URL. So every time they run it, they just pull the latest version of the software. And gets around that need for constant updates and stuff. So a very dynamic field. Software development's constantly changing. Code repositories have a lot of tools. It's more than just like online storage, right? Dropbox and Google Drive, we can keep our files there, but that's really all we can do. It's just a place to keep our files. We don't have any extra functionality. They've added a lot of other stuff in here, so there's also like social aspects here. If I go to my account, maybe click here. Yeah, so this is probably other students, but like 16 people that just watch my code repositories to see what I'm working on. I'm guessing it's probably former students because I use it in classes a lot, in the SF classes a lot. Chat rooms, all that sort of stuff. A lot of collaborative tools, but a site that you will definitely see at some point. So you might want to go ahead and set up a GitHub account if you don't have one, because you will need it at some point and just kind of practice uploading code. I'm gonna make that a small extra credit assignment, or like 10 points. Not a big one, but something to keep in mind. And if it makes code publicly available, it relates to open source stuff. So everybody heard of open source before. It's probably going in terms of free software. That's what a lot of people think about, the free version, right? You don't have to pay for it, which I'll say something now about this. As a student, expensive software sounds really, really rough, right? You see those big price tags on software, and so I gotta use this. Usually free for students, but then afterwards, paying that bill seems like a lot. But remember that, like, if you're a software developer, and you buy an expensive IDE, that's a business expense. So come tax season, that's an itemized deduction. And when you're making really, really good IT money, you're going to want those itemized deductions on your tax return because the IRS is going to want a big chunk of that money, unless you have things that you can write off like business expenses. So after you're a student, expensive software is really, really nice. When you're making 120 grand a year and the IRS wants a massive, massive chunk of it, like, well, I had to go spend $6,000 on software, and then that cuts out what you end up owing there. So the expensive software is nice at that point. But open source, which you've probably heard of in terms of free, is that's what most people worry about. But for our topic this week, it relates that open source means open source code. We don't just download an installer and have that finished product to work with. We can download the source code and modify that to fit our needs. That's something software developers often do. There's no need to start from scratch with everything. We go get the source code, some open source code from something that already does that, and then start and just do the customizations to make it perfectly fit our needs. Common thing is software development. And those are usually grabbed from GitHub. So I grabbed this one this morning. Just a little terminal running a bash shell. The bash shell I like to put on my Windows machines to control Windows doesn't have admin access by default. So I had to come in and add admin access to it. And to do that, they made an open source project. So they put the source code here to grab it, or just a copy and paste instruction to run that right in there. There's cybersecurity people in here, ethical hacking, penetration testing sort of thing. There's a really nice one that just came out this week, Code Cheat, or a couple of weeks ago. So it's an open source thing. So this is for reverse engineering, kind of focused towards reverse engineering video games. But like when you're running a game off Steam, you end up with that compiled source code, just get the binary there, right? Well, we view it in hexadecimal. So if you wanted to see get the source code, you have to put the source code back together from the binary. This is software to help along with that. Really, really nice ones. They started with the one NSA uses, and this button on GitHub will get fork. You can just take somebody else's code repository and make your own code repository from that and start with that. So you don't even have to like copy and paste. And if you make good changes, you can push it back to theirs so it doesn't disconnect it, or you can disconnect it and have your own thing. But they did that with the reverse engineering software that NSA uses and added some really nice features. Like when you're looking at the binary code, if you figure out what something is, you can double click on it and replace the hexadecimal, right? The hexadecimal letters with a name, like a variable. We saw variables the other day. And then you do that enough and you build the source code back up from the binary. It is a slow, tedious process. It's not something that you do in movies. It looks like they do. Hollywood, it looks like they do it really, really quick. It is a slow, tedious process to dig through binary and try to turn that back into source code, but it's stuff that helps with that. And that's what open source code really means. Even in the long run, software developers often look at open source for free because it helps with the budget a lot. That's usually a big concern for us. But if you're into IT, keep that in mind, that if you need to do something, you don't have to start from scratch. Go grab the open source code and then start adjusting it to fit your needs. And that way you don't have to just start completely blank. And I'll quickly mention version control, where the name Git comes from. So I'm going to open the file. There's going to be some follow along stuff in a few minutes, but I'll just kind of point at this real quick. I'll make a new folder. Just give it some random name and open my terminal from here. So if I refer to that, so GitHub is named after Git, which is a term. I thought I'd just type it in first. It's an instruction that we put in our terminals. It's not something specifically for a website. It is actually a computer instruction. GUIs have been made, but it's one that typically it's going to be on all of your computers in the background automatically. So it's one of those instructions we don't put buttons and icons to click on for the average user to click on it. It's in the background for computer experts. I'll just initialize the folder, and notice how I have dot there. Dot refers to the current directory. So instead of having to trying to figure out all of this stuff, or I guess even typing dot there is like copy and paste that. So whatever folder we're currently in is just dot. And then that created this other folder here with a whole bunch of stuff in it. So the big thing here is if I add some files. So I use the Sublime text editor. I'm talking about text editors here very shortly, so there's going to be a follow along thing. And there are text editors installed in the GRE lab if you need to log on to those computers. I don't know, I'll call this file one.txt. Here's a text file. Save that, close that. And I'll use that git instruction to like add that to the folder and git commit and actually commit to making those changes. So this is the version control stuff. Created a file. And it tells us all the information about it, all of that, git log, and pull up. There's only one thing that's happened so far, but it tells us about that, what we're looking at. You can make another file. I'll go to Sublime and I guess make file 2.txt. Another file. In a real situation, the words in the file are what would be important, but for a quick demo, I'll just kind of make multiple files and use the file names. So again, I'll add that to the tracking. We call it staging the file. The function control is actually paying attention to that file. Now commit to the changes. Another file. There we go. And over in the file explorer, hopefully no surprises. We can see those. We go in, double click on the files, open them up, do all the work with them and all that stuff. But here's where the version control stuff comes in different. Right? I mentioned earlier something y'all have all probably done with essays, right? You think you get finished, you need final version, and then you have final version 2, final version 2, or final version 3, final version 4, all lots and lots of different versions. So I have let me not review that. Let me pull up everything that's done that's happened so far. There's a couple things I'm like, oh, maybe I jumped the gun a little bit on that one. Didn't need that second file, so I could grab this, check out this earlier version. And come back over and notice when I checked out the earlier version, the second file, that second file is gone. We're looking at a different version, so instead of tacking on little things to change your change the file name to keep different versions, there's alternate versions of this folder, and we switch back and forth between which one we're actually viewing at any given time. That's version control stuff. We don't end up with a mess because it takes very, very little data to do those alternate versions. Yeah, it's very compressed. It's what we call a snapshot. Without getting into details, it's a lot less data to track that there's another file later. And I can get right back to that. Pull up the finished version, go back and forth. I can make it an alternate one altogether. Git log. I'm going to do an abbreviated version here and git checkout -b. Well, I'll git branch alternate, and I want to start way back here. I'll check out that new branch that I made. Over here, it went back to that earlier spot, started it's like branching like a tree, went back to the beginning, and then created a second pathway that we could, a completely different pathway to add files on. Sublime other file to.txt. A different another file. Not very good English there, but something different on it. Yeah, dot. Okay, commit that. More stuff. Have to have some sort of message for it. Now, if we look at the log, we only notice we're looking at the alternate version. So all we see is the creating a file and then adding that one that was terribly grammatically incorrect. I think the name and the stuff in it was grammatically incorrect. Or clear that. I could switch back over to the main branch. That's not what I wanted to do. Do it that way. Try to do it where you can see both of them at the same time. And switch back over to the main branch and notice that the file, that directory is changing. So we can control the version a lot better that way. There are different types of version control systems, and obviously software developers have some of the best version control out there because they're software developers are the ones that write it. So it's kind of intended for use with code, but obviously you could do that for your slide decks. You got a presentation coming up, do different versions of slide deck. Great for music. If you're doing alternate, probably have the same tracks recorded, but you're going to have a lot of variance in how you mix those. Mixing with the volume versus mixing with the equalizer. Get very different effects. One that usually throws people off is a drum kit is much louder than a flute, right? But if you're in a room and a drum kit and a flute are playing, you can hear both of them. So it's not the volume, it can't be the volume that separates them. That throws a lot of people off at first. But we'll have lots of different mixes of the songs. That's a good one. Essays, usually gonna have a few different essays, right? The content's still the same, but maybe different introductions and conclusions to decide which one it is. So that version control stuff can be useful in lots and lots of settings. Git in particular was has a lot of features that are focused towards programming, towards software development. Which is our main topic this week. We looked at some quick examples the other day, not a software development class. There's some follow along examples. If you already know some programming, feel free to go further. More is always acceptable in my class. I wanted to look at something that will be useful for everybody though. Is everybody on a Windows machine here? I see head nods in the class. So there's going to be a follow along example if you want to log on to the machines here. If you don't have a computer with you, or for those on the Zoom call, follow along. And this one will be for a few points. I'm going to make it a graded assignment. There's going to be 2 of those this semester. There's another one when we get to week 7, and we'll follow along looking at clouds, and you'll just send me some screenshots there. I'll go ahead and tell you what they are. They're not surprise things. I already have them planned out. I just like to throw them in at what seems like the last minute. Remind people to come to class. People sometimes forget that. They get used to watching recordings or skipping the recordings. Or I guess the big thing is people get used to everything being as I learned to begin with, and they don't look at changes or stuff like that. So I like to throw things in occasionally just to do that, but they won't be worth a lot of points. So I'm not trying to cause a stumbling block for people, just those little reminders. So it will not big deals, but when we saw the other day, we kind of looked at IDEs. They come in all different shapes and sizes, some much bigger than others. But ultimately what those are just text editors that replace to write text, not like Word documents. Word documents are something different. Actually, if you take some code, if you take like Python code and copy and paste that into Microsoft Word or Google Docs or Pages, and then copy it back and try to run it, it won't work. Because I A document is something different. A document is for formatting stuff nicely. When we feed instructions in, we're just giving it straight Unicode. We're in America, so we're really just giving it straight ASCII code. We feed in those ASCII characters, and the computer set up to react to those ASCII characters. Kind of like what the terminal is doing. Windows X, if I run I, we go click that icon to start Chrome. That icon just runs the instructions start Chrome, if I can spell it correctly, in the background. And that's what happens when we do the double click. Just enter the ASCII code for that. So if you're heading into IT, you want to know how those actual instructions, not just where to click, right? And there's some that we do quite a bit. Like this, start Chrome, and maybe if we're going to do homework, that might be a good example. We don't want to just start Chrome. I'm going to start Chrome, and we'll need to open up ivylearn.ivtech.edu. So no, these things are space delimited. Delimited is just a fancy way of saying separated. We'll open up Chrome, ivylearn, docs.google.com/u/0. /u is the users. Most of us have more than one Google account, right? If you click on that, they're going to be listed in the same order every time. 0 is the one that shows up at the top. Then 1, 2, 3. Just go down the list if you want to open it for a different user. Stuff to do homework. Maybe open YouTube. Should probably be put in. I didn't type that anywhere else. YouTube.com, so we can have that nice little abstraction. Oh, I have to put quote marks around this. Actually, I can take out the /u/0, I think. I was trying to make that a little bit shorter. Maybe it'll work if I do this. Okay. Docs isn't working. I'll try that again. I apparently typed something wrong. So I'm going to start Chrome and go to ivylearn.ivtech.edu. Okay, that one worked. I must have had a typo in there somewhere. But open this up, do the homework, that sort of stuff. And we usually have those other things like I was pointing at. Docs.google.com. I thought that's what /document. I forgot. /document, /spreadsheet, /something. I have to add that extra little part in there. And then open up all the stuff we need to sit down and do homework. We're going to do that over and over again. We wouldn't want to type it, but it's unique to our situation, so it's not already built up. So I was going to look at batch scripting to do that. There's different ones for different systems. On Windows, there's batch scripting, like batch, like a whole big collection of things related to the old mainframes. The terminology started with a batch of punch cards. Instead of standing there and feeding in a punch card before the days of the keyboards, run a punch card through the machine and wait for it to finish, then run the next one in, and the next one. We just take the whole stack of the punch cards, sit them in there, and then the machine would have the little slider to grab them one at a time. So a batch of them. That's what runs on Windows. Linux has shell scripts. So, well, on Windows, we'll use the .bat extension to indicate its batch file. Linux has .shell scripts or .sh, which are a similar thing. They're just made for a different terminal, basically. Made to run in a different terminal. Actually, on my machine, I have Linux machines running. So I will maybe do a quick example of the shell. I think everybody gave the affirmative when I asked about Windows earlier. So we'll do it on the Windows machine. the batch versions. I'll quickly do a show one at the end. And Mac has command files. That is the extension. It is actually .command, but most people do .sh, the shell scripts like we have in Linux anyway. Very, very few people do the formal one that Apple created, because the general shell scripts like we use in Linux work fine on an Apple, and actually they're easier. They're much easier to do cross-platform. So I'm going to look at that, but we're here in ASCII code. So we need a place to type that code, or technically Unicode, but we're Americans, so we're only going to use the first few. So I use the Sublime text editor. There's lots and lots of text editors out there. I really like this one. One of the nicest features about it anymore is if there's a GPU available, it will carry out work on the GPU. The text part happens on the GPU, so that your CPU is free to do whatever instructions you're typing in, and moves it over to the side. But there's lots and lots and lots of options available. I paid for this one. It's only, I think it's up to $100 now, but it's forever. You can use it for free forever, and it just says unregistered copy at the top. Like, they don't even mind if you make money with it. You can use it for free forever, and it just says the words unregistered copy at the top. But it's fairly cheap, and they made a really, really good product. So I definitely didn't mind. It was $80 back then. The price has gone up twice since, went up to 90. I think it's $100 now. So over the years, that license still is good forever. As different versions come out and stuff too. So that's one I really, really like. There's lots of them out there. My general recommendation for anytime you need to look for software or anything, why do I have a bookmark? I don't usually go with bookmarks. I must have accidentally did something. Is search for a best of list. So like best text editor 2023. So we talk about IDEs. Those are the big, powerful ones that will organize stuff, keep it all straight for you, have all kinds of background functionality running. And when our projects get big, we need that. But if our project's going to be three small scripts, all that other stuff is kind of overkill. Having a big, powerful IDE is a lot, because it'll take longer for that to start up than it takes us to write those 3 short scripts. So a simple text editor is something you will definitely want where you're heading into. Adam actually reached end of life. I'm not sure. I guess a lot of people still like it. They don't like that it reached end of life. It's an interesting story that actually leads to this one right over here. So that was built as a community project on GitHub. Tens of thousands of programmers gave input on what would be the perfect text editor. And it was really, really nice. Came out in 2013, I believe. They did a great job with it. It was specifically for web program software developers. Thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of software developers gave input on what would be great to have in a text editor. And it worked great. It was very popular, as would be expected from something like that. And it was made on GitHub as a community project. People just went to the little forum page on GitHub and posted their ideas, and they implemented some of them. And huge debates sprung up and went on for years about what were different opinions and stuff. And obviously, there were some lessons learned along the way. Like, by the time they got finished and released it, they were like, there were some things we could have done better. One of those things is they decided that what would have been better was, instead of releasing a final product, it's intended for software developers, they would release the libraries, the packages that they use to make that product. Modules where we can import pre-existing code and use that in our code. So instead of releasing the final product, they released the stuff to make the final product. So the second round, they created something called the Electron Framework. The design for that was basically, the idea for that is that there's all the libraries needed to make a text editor. So in 20 minutes time, the software development team can have the perfect text editor for their project. Actually, they did go further. In 20 minutes time, you should be able to have the perfect IDE for your project. No bloat, because you're the one that made it, so you only have those extra features and stuff. It's a really nice thing. It's showing up everywhere. But again, made as a community project on GitHub. And by that time, Microsoft had bought GitHub. So Microsoft took those libraries and released them as the default version. That's what VS Code is. That's quickly become a very popular one. They put a black style sheet on it. They changed the colors. It's the only, and then a couple things in the background. But it's pretty much the default release of that, which has kind of thrown some people off from what it was. Vim has been going since the 1970s. It's originally virtual input, and then the M stands for improve. They added colors in the early 90s. That was the improved. And there's also Neo Vim now, where it has more functionality. What most people really like about that one still is that it predates a mouse by years. Like a mouse was still an experimental novelty. The very first one was only a year or two old, probably still sitting on a shelf. It was long before the Smithsonian acquired that first mouse. We'll talk about that at some point. So it is all with the keyboard. Takes a while to learn all the keyboard shortcuts, but it's really, really quick. And it actually runs in your terminal. You start it and it runs in whatever terminal you're using. My terminal still open. Right here. Oh no. And it just runs right in the terminal. Everything is shortcuts. To close is Q instead of trying to put something with your mouse. So lots of little changes and things like that. But you'll want to look in some different ones. Anytime you're looking for software, my recommendation is go check whether it's like best of list and best text editors and look through there. Those blogs usually have other things like the things you wouldn't have thought of, right? It's a blog, so they're going to write about stuff. And you can read about those features that you wouldn't have thought of beforehand and see what's there. Try different ones out, see what you like. This looks like a good list. My recommendation would be Sublime. Visual Studio Code has become immensely popular. See that everywhere, which is really the Electron framework. It's an interesting thing. It's actually a web application, and it launches in a container. That's something we will talk about a little bit when we get to virtualization. The old style desktop applications are kind of a thing in the past. Every language except Python has got rid of them. Python used one that was created in the 1980s as some of their core libraries. So they can't get it out of the language, and people won't stop using it or teaching it in classrooms and stuff. And that's about the only desktop application that still exists. I think it's reached end of life, but people are still putting that on best of lists, so I guess you can still download it somewhere. I really like Sublime Text. Notepad++ has been very popular for years. If you're logged into the GRE computers here, I know Notepad++ is there. I haven't updated the list in a while. I just realized that this morning. I need to update what text editors we have on here, but I know Notepad++ is on there. Notepad comes with your Windows. You just need the most basic version. If you're on a Mac, I think it's Text Edit. And you can set that up in Text Wrangler. Notepad and Notepad++ are like those two. Text Edit to Text Wrangler on Mac. So basic Notepad is nice, and I like it. For learning things. I really like the idea of basic Notepad. There's no predictive text, no color coding or anything, because you have to learn it really well. But classes are usually under time constraints, so that's counterproductive to the time constraints in a classroom. There's a little bit help. So you will at least have Notepad where you can type stuff up on your computer. But try one of these. I'm going to be using Sublime Text, VS Code, Sublime Text, and VS Code as platform. Whatever type of machine you have, it will work on they'll work on those. Those would be my recommendations. No plus plus is really good. Um, so if you're heading into IT, take time to look at one of those. But for now, we'll need to install one to follow along for something that's going to be worth points after a break today. You want me to send out some links just to download a couple real quick? And then we can download them and install them over the break if you're on your own computer. And there'll be a couple on the GRE lab if you need them. So my sharing screen, yeah. So Sublime text. Copy that. And I will send it out as an announcement in Ivy Learn. I'll just put 3 here, and then you can choose between those 3, or install all 3 of them. Then you have alternatives, and you can choose jump back and forth between them depending on the project. Announcements. Do it. Please install one of these text editors. So Sublime and maybe VS Code. VS Code is becoming incredibly popular. A lot of people like it. One nice thing about VS Code, we don't see commercials for text editors, right? That's not something they go and play commercials for. Is that actually downloading? No, actually download. Look for it. So what Microsoft did to promote it is whenever the developers, or really even more people than that, whenever the people that work at Microsoft have downtime, they're supposed to make tutorials to put on YouTube and talk about how great VS Code is for doing whatever they're showing. So we end up with tons and tons of tutorials on YouTube, things to follow along and learn. And they just keep saying how great VS Code is for doing it. There's nothing that can't be done in any text editor. It's just a text editor. All the integrations and all of that stuff, we have that any place we would go. But that's since there's not commercials, that's what they're doing to promote it. Notepad++ has been popular for decades. This only runs on Windows. It is Windows specific. Those first 2 are cross-platform. But Notepad++ is older and continuing to build along the way. I don't see a date on here, but the latest version of this came out within the past couple of months, and this is starting 25 years ago, whereas the other 2 were like 10 or 12 years old for the back to version 1. Actually, VS Code is only like 6 years old back to version 1. Sublime's about 9 years old, I think. So this one has been building for a lot longer and has a lot more functionality and stuff. It's not quite outdated yet. But install one of those. Make sure you have a text editor you can use. And if you're on the GRE labs, let me share my screen over there real quick. Where my buttons go? Okay. That was convenient. I wish I knew how I made the Zoom buttons go behind my other windows, because they're usually in the way. I like to be able to do that on purpose. Share screen. There it is. Close that. And yeah, that higher Ivy stuff, check into that, because that's why everybody comes to college, right? Get a good job making money. And we have a department that helps with that. So you can scroll through here. I know Notepad++ is on here. Okay, yeah. Notepad, you can just open Notepad++. Don't need to update. Oh, language. So if I start going through here, you'll see that it knows a lot of languages. So Just like our language was to speak, we use the word lexicon. The lexicon of language, the keywords, the color, and for a text editor, the color coding, we call it lexing, related to the lexicon of the language. And all of these text editors that just sent in that announcement will know a lot of languages. Yeah, there are languages on here. There's Mojo on here. Mojo, what about? I could spend a lot of time looking for that. I see things on there, even though that text editor is 25 years old, I see programming languages on there that were at least 3 years old. I was looking to see if there was one this summer. Oh, actually, I probably should have hit the update button and then the languages that came out this summer would be on there. Programming languages or software themselves are dynamic, changing that. But looks like it's time for a break. 10 minutes sound good to everybody. During that 10 minutes, if you don't have a text editor in your computer, please install one. And after the break, we're going to do a follow along thing that'll be worth points. But really, the reason we're doing this not for the points is because it's something that I can guarantee, no matter where you're heading in IT, it's something you're going to do. So it'll be something very, very useful for you. I'll see y'all in just a moment. Oh, whoops, got that button.